Okay. And I'm going to do that too here in a second. So I'm about to mute everybody. Get ready. And then, yep, you're unmuted. That's great. All right. I'm going to press the record on Zoom here. You're going to do great. This is going to be good. Okay, didn't say it. I'm recording but didn't say it because I think you did. Let me do the YouTube.
Excellent. There's a laugh. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for dropping into our joint conversation. Who are you in Astrological Community? I want to thank everyone for coming into one of the last lecture sections. We just have this round and then the closing ceremony. I know it's been a big weekend for everyone. Lots of really, really great lectures. I am Bear River. This is my very special guest, Kirah Tabourn, and we are most excited to chat with you all about community and astrology. Some of you may know that I switched up my lecture topic. I was going to be talking about land grabs and land back and colonization and revolution, and it seemed a little heavy for this particular time of year. I thought something that was a little more interactive, focusing a bit more on how we can make use of those benefics and look forward with a little more hope and inspiration. Seemed more befitting of this Jupiter and Pisces time.
Oops, sorry.
So yes, I am Bear River. My pronouns are he, him, his. I am a mixed Black and Indigenous queer person who hails from the West Coast. I grew up in Skagit, as in both the name of the county is Skagit, and that's also the name of the people who are from there. My colonizing ancestors colonized Skagit land, but my indigenous ancestors come from Tanana country in the interior of Alaska. And you'll hear me kind of weave in this very mixed experience of being a person from Turtle Island into some of this conversation today. And then specifically in terms of what my relationship to community in astrology. I was very, very fortunate last year to sit as an interim co-chair for the mentoring committee for AFAN, the Association for Astrological Networking, an org that is very near and dear to my heart. And I'm currently one of the mentors. So if you haven't heard of the mentoring program, I'll definitely talk about that. Highly encourage you to check it out. And for those of you who aren't familiar with my work, I am a kind of mixed practice astrologer. Intersectionality is in the political praxis is really deeply embedded in all the things that I'm doing as an astrologer. And then in terms of technique, I'm certified in Hellenistic astrology, horary, and electional, and always interested in synthesizing any of the tools that work, whatever is bringing clients, querents, patients, whatever we want to call the folks we work with, the most practical benefit for grounded growth and embodied empowerment.
That's right. Just talk about me now.
Yeah, talk about you.
Hey everyone, I'm Kirah. Mostly known as the Strology on the web, on the World Wide Web. I do a whole lot of shit within the umbrella of astrology. I do readings, not right now, but I'm hoping to get back to it. I write stuff, or I do that sometimes. And then I am the director of Fresh Voices in Astrology, which is a platform that a platform for emerging astrologers to share work that they're passionate about. I also founded a community called the 11th House, which is like a membership community that I run. And it's so fun. We basically do monthly meetups twice a month, and we have a Discord and, community kind of forum, prompts, all the things, lots of fun there. And then I also run a course called the Astrology Fundamentals course. I missed that you it's supposed to say the Astrology Fundamentals course, which is
yeah, it should.
it's
That's a really
a
good point. That is definitely a Mercury.
but that's like
course.
when you hear me just say it to you, like I can understand where that might be. There might be a typo there.
Because I didn't finish this copy.
But yeah, the Astrology Fundamentals course, and that also has a community component to it as well. And I don't know what I also founded a magazine called Influx Mag that will be back next year. I'm excited about that. So yeah, lots. And then I guess on top of that, I've just always been into community. I started hosting monthly dinners for New York City astrologers in 2018 and kept that going for a while until the pandemic, basically. And then what else did I do? Oh, I used to run a meetup called Deep Seekers, and we'll get more into that and the timing around that. But that kind of became the 11th house eventually. So yeah, I love this community. If we're gonna, well, we'll talk about the word community, but I love my people in this space, and I'm excited to talk more about it.
Yeah, so those are some of the many reasons that I invited Kirah to join me today. So why does this matter? Why did I decide I'm going to switch my lecture topic and invite another person to come talk about something different today? So here is a picture of me, Kirah, and our lovely friend, Diana Rose Harper. For those of you who've been here this weekend, you may have had the chance to see all three of us now speaking. And this is actually the three of us meeting at NORWAC 2019. Obviously, we love NORWAC quite a bit and the community that it fosters because of the opportunities provided by community. And we'll talk about what is this word community, what does it mean, and what does it mean for us astrologers? Because of the opportunities provided to have an embodied experience of community, I can certainly say for myself, all of the things that have unfolded since 2019 NORWAC have been made possible, both through meeting folks involved in various organizations, learning about AFAN, among many others, and also just engaging with other people. Some of you may know that Kirah, Diana, and I, along with several other colleagues and a host of people who are waiting their turn to come join us, have been working on starting an organization called MICA. Community, as has been mentioned by various astrologers over this weekend throughout the keynotes, and throughout the panels, historically astrology has been something that has been passed down. It's so lineage based, particularly when we're getting into those really, really old sources. We know that we're reading somebody who took down what their teacher was saying while their teacher said, don't share this information with other people. So I feel like community is so deeply, deeply embedded in what it means to be an astrologer, finding our folks, finding our people. So for those of you who attended my NORWAC lecture last year on intersectionality, you probably heard me talk at length about significations. How can we bring in the planets? How can we use the planets as instructive for pulling in lenses of intersectionality and then doing something practical with it? So this little significations checklist is just how can we drill down through the planet Saturn? We want ground rules. So I'm starting with Saturn here. We've introduced ourselves, so you know who's holding this container. And then we're going to introduce some rules and some structures around this container so we can all get the most out of it. So we can do Jupiter. We can all grow together. We can all have equal access to the opportunity of this that is presented by this conversation. Mercury's getting me to y'all. And we can all learn something together. Hopefully what we're learning is about how we can harness our power, empower one another, experience more agency as members of this field, industry, community, as fellow astrologers, get a bit more agency so that we can get that good, juicy beneficness from Venus, cooperation, inclusion. We can see our values, our ethics, right, manifested in the space, talk about it. And then for this conversation specifically, really want to bring in space for Mercury. Maybe we can beseech them today with some storytelling amongst us astrologers about the various astrologies we practice and the magic of community.
Beautiful.
Okay, so ground rules today, super duper simple. Just respect one another. Love seeing y'all in the chat. Won't touch that thing again. Respect one another. Please, no assumptions. Let's all, if we are going to make an assumption, make them in the direction of generosity towards one another. We're all here to talk about community and astrology and hopefully have fun doing it. Please tell your own stories. So if there's anything, this is kind of on that realm of confidentiality. This is being recorded, it's public. So if there's anything you don't want shared publicly, please don't share that. And please share your own stories, not other folks. And be sure to use your registered name on the display. That's your name tag. Invitations. I thought it was a webinar room, so ignore the use the Q&A feature. Just ask them in the chat. Our lovely room monitor, Zach, will be helping us field those questions. And feel free to chat throughout this conversation, chime in, add your 2 cents. It's not distracting to us. And definitely let us know about your favorite local organization, your favorite local groups, your favorite astrological organizations. If there's one that you're a member of or a bunch that you're a member of, you can throw that in the chat right now.
Yeah, please let us know. It'd be cool to know what groups you're already a part of, whether they're established organizations or just like cool hangouts that you do with some local friends or non-local friends.
Yeah, Kirah, what are some of the orgs that you're a member of or have been a member of?
I am currently a member of AYA, Astrological Association for Young Astrologers. Sorry. What else am I a member of right now? I think I'm only a member of AYA. I've been previously a member of ESAR, OPA. What are the other? Oh, and NCGR a long time ago, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Nice.
Or probably AFAN too. Sorry.
Probably AFAN too. Can you scroll in the chat?
Oh yeah. Do you want me to? Yeah.
Oh, okay, cool. Beautiful. Awesome.
Oh yeah. Let's
on
see.
The board for Astrology Toronto. Excellent. Yes, the AFAN mentorship program is incredible. We're hoping that this can be kind of like a hybrid in real life astrology community experience. We're all here in real time. Maybe we'll even get fancy and like I'll meet some folks at the end. We'll definitely have a good time in the breakout rooms in the Galaxy after session. WASA, AFAN, love WASA, Portland School of Astrology, AFAN, Oregon Astrological Association.
Mm-hmm.
Archer, if you have a timed chart for Oregon Astrological Organization, you want to add that to Astro Data Bank and pull that into the research too. Wonderful, wonderful.
Cool.
Excellent. So our learning objectives, let's get into Jupiter. We are going to cover where can you see community in the chart? Who's out there? I think we somehow missed our clarify or define or something like that. I don't know what happened to the slides. And we won't worry too much about it. It's going to be mostly relaxed. Invitation to all of you out there. This is not a slide heavy presentation. You can totally ignore all the visuals unless you are a visual learner. We'll talk about who's out there, some of the existing astrological organizations. Y'all, there's a lot. I could not put all of them in there, but I do have some charts. And then we're going to talk. That's the plan. So easy peasy. So what is community?
Oh, you're asking me?
Yeah. How would you define community?
I would define a community as a group of people who share something, right? Who share something in common. Mm-hmm. And you know, we had a couple, there's a couple of us here. Mm-hmm. So there's like 4 of us, and then had a couple of other astrologers over. And last night we were talking a little bit about this, mm-hmm. and the subject of trust came up. Also in response to, we were talking about the race and astrology panel that happened last night, and kind of debriefing after that, and talking about, Diana brought the subject of trust up when it comes to community, and which is just 100% absolutely an important point to bring up, that you can't really have community without there being some sort of trust, and also the one-on-one connections. I think that's a huge part of what makes a community, that people need to know each other. And so, yeah, I think the broad definition would be a group of people that have that share something in common, and I would say have connection, like form connections with one another based on that shared interest. Does that work?
Yeah.
How about you? What would you say a community is?
I definitely have been sitting a lot with what Diana said about about that sense of trust and thinking about how that relates to some of the astrology, which we'll get into in just a minute. I would define community as a group of folks who are, or a group of many beings, right? Because we can include our planetary intelligences. We can get really animistic
Mm,
with it, like our tree spirits, our house spirit. They're part of our communities too, especially for those of us who are engaged in like astrological magic, astro magic practices and other magical
mhm,
practices, I think, certainly for myself. So I think about it as being very spatially bound.
mm,
So while I recognize this feeling of shared affinity with all astrologers practicing all types of astrologies, my earliest experience with Astrological Community was actually a local org, the Washington State Association for Astrologers, WASA. Our lovely, glorious leader, Capricorn in Chief, Laura McPandian. That's her org. So I started with WASA, and that feeling of coming month after month, like a school year, kind of like 9 months out
mhm,
of the year, but that like, okay, for the next year, every single month, I'm going to be dropping in on this day of the month, and I'm going to see most of the same faces. And these people, some of whom I maybe only shook their hand once or made eye contact from across the room, but these are people who are in my community. And so even like popping into the last NORWAC, so 2019 in person, I remember seeing one of the folks, Neil, who, make eye contact with him. He always has a good question for every single lecture. So community for me are the folks who give you that feeling where you step into a room and you go, ah, yes, I recognize you. I remember you.
mm,
Irrespective of how well we know each other. Maybe we have
mhm.
totally different astrologies, but we share that sense of embodiment, living
Presence.
it out,
Yeah.
presence. Mhm.
I love that. Yeah. It's, I'm like, it's so day chart, night chart, it's so nocturnal, diurnal.
Yeah.
Like I, cause yeah, the embodied presentness of community is so important. But I, I wonder, I feel like I've had that, but not, probably not as much.
Mhm.
Like when I think of that feeling, I think of like school. I'm like, oh yeah, I felt that when I would, go. I went to a very small all girls school. There was just, I graduated with 51 other girls. So, it's like I grew up with these people. I have that familiar. I might not like all of them. Definitely didn't like all of them, but I had this familiar feeling of just like we've shared so much space together and
Mhm.
throughout 12 years together, basically. But when I think community, I do think so much. I think of like my online
Mhm.
communities, and like even from being like in middle school,
Mhm.
just like the forums that you would go on, or like, what have you. The Facebook,
Mm.
I remember there used to be Facebook groups with like forums way back in the day, way back in the day.
Oh.
Yeah, I'm really old now that my Saturn return came to pass. So so yeah, like I do think of it so much more as like these online spaces.
Mhm.
So
That makes a lot of
it's
sense.
interesting. Yeah.
Thinking about your lecture from
Yeah.
yesterday, and just the positions we occupy within the millennial generation,
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
that Sag heavy part elder millennial.
Hmm.
And so, Facebook was college for me, and just
Mm,
that different relationship with
yeah.
Saturn, that Jupiter ruled Saturn. I'm like, well, if we go party together, we're in community,
Right. Right.
versus
Right.
like, especially thinking about Saturn and Aquarius, which is one thing that I would love to, invite everyone in the chat to chime in, as Saturn's through Aquarius is one of the things that I've been thinking about is what does this mean for community if community is somehow spatially bound? And we can slip to the next slide.
Okay.
If
Cool.
community is spatially bound, then what does Saturn in Aquarius mean for space, particularly in the context of COVID, where so many of us have only had the option, or 90% of our option has been to be in these digital spaces, and thinking about Kirah's success with the 11th house and with the astrology fundamentals course communities. Those are communities. Those are folks who are actively engaging and talking to each other. And I'm like,
Hmm.
some of them are my clearance, and I hear
I
them talking
know.
about, oh, I talked to
It's so
somebody
cute.
else in the group, and that's a real community,
Yeah.
So here's one definition. I pulled this from Britannica, and I chose this definition because this is actually a biological definition of community. So an interacting group of various species in a common location, right? So if we think about community in that way, especially out here I guess further north in California, where I tend to be, if you think about like a single redwood tree is a biome in and of itself. It hosts an entire community. So a forest of trees with all the undergrowth plants, all the animals that live there, rooted into the soil, which is itself its own community with bacteria and fungi. So if that's one way of thinking about community, and we then think about the etymology of the word community, like where does this word come from? I cannot speak either Latin or French, so I'm not gonna mutilate these words, but I can tell you it comes from the late 14th century. It's a noun that has meant a number of people who are associated together by the fact of residence in the same locality. That it came from communitatem, which in the Latin, and then to community, I apologize, Diana, in the French. And basically the connotation, right? So the way that people understood the word started out as meaning fellowship. So very much curious definition. Do we share fellowship? Then we are in community. And then over time, it evolved to be a word that started to be associated with a specific group of people bound in a specific place. Right. So yeah, live journal community, live journal, dead journal. Anyone remember dead journal? That's too emo.
Too old.
Way too.
I mean, you're too old.
I'm too old. Thank you, Kirah. So dead journal. Yes, thank you. So dead journal, live journal, Tumblr, the forum pages, these early community spaces, both in the digital sphere, but then we've also got these local orgs that definitely, local or national, precede us. And we know that prior to the internet age, everyone was doing something in real life. That's what it meant. So I'm curious about what you all think about that difference. Have you found, is there anybody in this room, if you feel like chiming in, who was involved in astro orgs before there was an internet? And do you notice a difference in the astrology organizations, local or national or international, since the dawning of the internet age?
That's a good that's a good question. Like, yeah, I would love to hear. Is anyone here on, or has anyone here been in local astro orgs before the dawning of the internet?
How to move the mouse so right
Oh,
thing
no.
to swipe through the people to see who's in here. We won't call anybody out and make anybody name themselves to say, but I can certainly say that I've had the immense honor and privilege of sitting with the elders in our community, who have regaled me with the stories of back in the day. I got a firsthand account from Georgia Stathis about how AFAN came to be. And it's very clear that there's a lot of excitement, or the impression I get is that there has been much excitement as the internet unfolded and as our internet millennial generation came online into the astrological world. And also this interesting, I feel like we can talk a little bit about some of the things that have been brewing on the interweb spaces, around these questions of etiquette. And this is one that I've been pondering. So my earliest introduction to community, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this as well. My first exposure to community was as a youth activist in the Bay Area of California, and doing radical anti-oppression organizing from a peer facilitation and coalition building perspective, or kind of praxis in space. So we had really tight solidarity statements with every organization that we were in coalition with, which meant that community was this thing that meant literally the people that you would be sitting in a room with, stuffing donation requests and fundraiser drive things, or flyering with, or going and standing out and like marching in the streets with. And so there was this kind of expectation that if there was a conflict within the community, that it would be mediated in this like peer resource, peer resolution sort of fashion, where you find, if you can't talk to that person yourself, you find somebody who will mediate, and you have the conversation privately and directly, or in the smallest group as is immediately impacted. And definitely, I think we can all at least agree that in the age of social media and read receipts, anybody who's lucky enough to not have their childhood on the internet, there were no read receipts, and now there are. And so that's one thing that I'm thinking about in terms of how things have changed.
Yeah. I don't know can I comment on that? I'm like,
freeform. Yeah.
I don't know. No, I don't know if I can. Because I just say that because, yeah, I don't know if I have that that same sort of contrast to look at. Like, I think, well, just hearing you talk about that makes me be like, oh yeah, that's the right way to do it, right? Like that's something that I wish was more possible in our internet age. um yeah, just thinking about like Twitter and even, just social media in general, and the things that go on, the conflicts that arise. And um yeah, I guess I'm just like, how could that model be, is it possible for that model to be replicated or yeah, mirrored in some way now, like in our internet communities? I don't know. I think that it's worth continuing to discuss, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. And to that end, we can keep jamming through these slides
Cool.
here.
Oops.
I did see Avery made a comment about Craigslist. I saw a couple comments about Craigslist. Avery made a comment about back in the pre-internet days, if you were witchy and woo in North Carolina specifically, that was not something you were announcing broadly and
Right.
loudly. So even that sort of a thing going on where there's so much more acceptance and so much more visibility to astrology today.
Hmm.
I think that is a good segue into this question of where can we see community in the chart? Because I've already heard us both mention a couple different things, particularly around the words familiarity.
Hmm.
I'm thinking about, and then I'm thinking about this question of affiliation. And so for anybody who is well versed in the significations of the houses, you probably already know where I'm going with this. To start with, the third house, the house of the goddess, the joy of the moon, the place where familiar environment exists, right?
Hmm.
Our literal local environments. That's what got me thinking about our biological communities, our neighborhood, our neighbors, our siblings, our cousins, our extended family. So the way that, I've been fortunate to, this is now my fourth NORWAC. How is that possible? That can't be true.
It's true.
I've done a number of NORWACs now, and I've been fortunate enough to do 2 embodied NORWACs and now 2 digital NORWACs. And there is this feeling of like extended family,
Mhm.
especially coming in where even folks were like, oh, I recognize you. We never even spoke, but you recognize my face. I recognize your face. And if we both come here, then we may as well be third cousins twice
Mhm.
removed.
I that's something I love about in-person NORWAC, hashtag NORWAC 2019. Um, but yeah, I think something that I think made that feeling possible for me was knowing people on Twitter beforehand. I think that really
Mhm.
made like the in-person meeting feel so much more like family, like like my people, because I had digital interactions with most of these people before.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You're scrolling through the chat, seeing lots of relating about like that feeling of isolation before the internet. But then now that there's this online world, it means that you kind of know people in this, know less people personally, but it blew the doors off the hinges,
Mm.
right? So like this being able, as Drew, being able to, like Kirah said, have this sense of like being in affiliation, right? Post secret, I see, feels like a really great way of saying that. um, and then I saw that Ariana Felix, Ari, made a great comment that I imagine has to do with that question of how do we scale up these, you know, uh, physical space-based community practices.
Mhm.
It requires a lot of intentionality to apply fractals, small-scale impact, to large volumes of people, especially because that would mean scaling down and moving more slowly. And I think that's where some of the tension can sit. Absolutely.
Yeah, yeah. And I think it requires those one-on-one connections. Like, it requires people to have personal relationships with one another within the community so that conflict resolution can happen. And that can't happen in person or online without those connections.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's made me think quite a bit about been thinking a lot about the planetary joys, TBH, in my client consultations and just in general, and thinking about the fact that the moon has its joy in the third house. And I've been thinking about the moon in the context of attachments. Think back to Jason Ollie's talk, pre-conference workshop and some of the comments he was making there. But if we're thinking about the moon as relating to attachment, to needs being met, needs being fulfilled, can also think, my brain is blanking. There's so many great lectures and conversations this weekend that have been weaving all of these themes in there. But if we think about the moon as indicating needs, security, secure attachment, I think we can start to see where, in the context of community, the third house becomes so important. If we're talking about the joy of the moon, that's where we're actually able to feel familiar enough with one another, to have that trust that Diana was talking about, to be able to feel like, okay, we actually truly are family. Therefore, I can engage in this dialogue with you. Therefore, we can get into that embodied communication.
Yeah. And I mean, for us, like that started immediately after we all met at NORWAC and like did not stop.
Yes.
Like I think within a month we had like a Slack channel going with like the three of us, and just it's just kind of been like, which I think that just happens when you meet people that you're like you connect with and you have great synastry with. But it was so like so much of our coming together is not just based on the fact that we like each other and like, I think you're cool, we can hang out, but it's so much of it has to do with our mutual love for astrology and that like meeting of the minds that happens as well. So it's more than just friends, and it's more than just colleagues.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I do want to ask you, since you do have two robust online communities and you just make communities wherever you go, given this kind of proximity and the way that we might think about these really embodied, neighborhoods, I'm talking about newspapers, things I can touch. How do you, as somebody who hosts and hold these digital spaces, how do you create that sense of familiarity and create spaces where that secure attachment can be formed?
Well, one thing that I've, at least for my online spaces, something that I've become like very, what's the word I'm looking for? Something that I love about Zoom. I'll just say that. Something that I love about Zoom is the ability to do breakout rooms. And I think that has just it's been so important in my classes and in the 11th house community, that it's not just like, oh yeah, we're gathering and I answer questions and then I see you later. And it's not just like, here's the Discord, like have fun, meet each other, it's like I'm putting people in rooms of like 3 to 4 people and they're talking to each other face to face about their charts and about transits. And I give prompts like, how's this lunar eclipse affecting you? Like what houses is it in? Talk about it in your groups. And I think that's what we would be doing in person. And I'm really grateful that that's something that we can make happen over the internet. Not that I'm trying to like, be like a spokesperson for Zoom or anything. I'm just like, it makes the world a difference when it comes to like online gathering, basically.
Sounds like it makes it more digestible, to use a lunar word.
Yes. Yeah, it is so third housey. And I think, just the ability to sort of form these smaller spaces, basically within a larger space, feels very third house as well. Like, again, I when I talk about the third house, my favorite phrase is local space. It's your local space. And so like kind of creating these little containers within the larger container. And then on top of that, folks meet outside of even the containers that I create. They'll form their own little meetings or meetups. They'll go on Clubhouse or what have you. And it's just like a huge joy for me to see. It's great.
It feels like a good segue into making this whole talk digestible for everyone. Getting into the 11th house. So if we're in the third house, we're in local space, we're in our small groups, we're digesting all of the ways that we can attach thoroughly. How do we move up into the 11th house? And I feel like this question from Taylor kind of fits in here too. So Taylor Schuler says, how do we create sustainable, meaningful relationships and community in a COVID or semi-post-COVID, remote, virtual, or hybrid world, especially within a community that is comprised of potential clients and professionals who for the most part make a living through the time they spend one-on-one with others, right? So how do we like really get into that meatiness of the third house and bring it outwards? And how do you ask for time to get to know someone within this container that is not strictly professional client, student, teacher? Is it possible? Do we need the magic of being with someone in physical presence to enable these connections to form organically? Ooh, I would love to hear. I don't think we're going to be able to keep up with. Oh goodness, what did I do?
It's okay.
I shouldn't touch those things. I see we got 60 new messages, so I'm going to keep it
Cool.
rolling. We're going to trust our room monitor. So 11th house, social networks, friends, allies, political groups, civic organizations. The thing I think of that you were talking about, Kirah, is like affiliation. That's what I tell clients.
I always say it's like your people.
Yeah, the people you choose to hang out with. Third house folks, like you show up to a space and they're already there. 11th house, you gotta.
It's like your
choose.
little sister. It's like, well, like I can't do anything about you being here. You're just here.
Older sibling life, yes, indeed. So if we haven't already touched on some of that kind of movement out of the third up into that 11th, I think these are the two that we have to look at for sure if we're going to talk about communities. House of the good diamond or the good spirit, or I always say guardian angel because I don't want to have to explain what diamond means, quite frankly. It's the joy of Jupiter, right? So we got one of the benefics coming in here. Can this be Astro Community for socially anxious introverts? Oh yeah, I feel like there's a lot of that going on, particularly in that 11th house with Discord spaces where you can really easily, as a like introvert, neurodivergent person, I love being able to just pop out when I am overstimulated.
Wait, what question are you asking me a question, or should I just talk about the 11th house?
I think you should talk about the 11th house, given that you named a whole community after the 11th house.
My 11th house is I have my Uranus Neptune North Node conjunction in my 11th house. And my chart ruler Jupiter is in the 7th and like forming a trine to that whole situation. So I have lots of love for the 11th house and the joy of Jupiter. And again, it's your people, and more specifically, it's the people who like have your back. It's the people who want to support you, because the 11th house is this place above the horizon that forms a sextile to the ascendant or to the first house or to the horizon. So automatically we get this sense of beneficence when it comes to that area of the chart. So again, when we think about our 11th house folks, we think about the people who are in your corner, who are cheering you on. And when I formed the 11th house, it's a big part of it was that, I guess the kind of backstory is that I love astrology, right? And I've been sort of doing this thing for over 8 years at this point. Wow, this is my 9th year. Anyway, so at the beginning when I first started, I think astrology is one of those things, you're learning a different language. And if you don't have anyone to speak that language with, it becomes really difficult. Like I personally believe that your knowledge can only go so far if you're not in community with other people, and share and talking about the things that you're learning. Could you imagine taking a master's program somewhere and not ever talking to someone about what you're learning, or talking to someone about it, but they can't, it's a different language, they don't know what you're really saying. They're like, oh, that's cool, that's really cool. Sweet. And I think so many of us have that experience with astrology. And I wanted to create a space where folks could speak our language with one another and meet other folks. Like the first astrology friend I had was someone I met on Reddit. And someone was making fun of astrology in some comment section on some random, subreddit. And I saw that they were defending it. And I was like, DM'd them. And I was like, oh my God, I saw you defending astrology. Like, are you into astrology? And we literally talked for we never met. We talked for 2 years after that. That was my first astrology friend. And it just took so long for me to get that community. My 11th is ruled by Saturn. And I started Deep Seekers when Saturn entered my 11th house, like within a month of Saturn entering my 11th house. And so, yeah, there, like for me, the 11th house things are very much tied to Saturn, which means I feel very responsible for creating these container. I feel like it's like what I need to do. It's my Saturn work. But yeah, I think it's just so much about the 11th house is so much about like finding those people who are in your corner and have your back and cheering you on and supporting you. And I feel like, again, like so fucking blessed with my 11th house situation, both in the chart and then in IRL. Because yeah, I mean, you're here, like I have all my friends here, like doing this conference with me. Yeah, I don't know, I feel like I'm kind of rambling at this
We'll
point,
get
but
to your chart. There's some chart examples. Let's do a couple more
I forgot we're
houses and
doing
we'll
that.
get up in there. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. So, but what about fun with other astrologers though?
Fun with other
Right,
astrologers.
because so far we're just like local groups and affiliations. So
We
the
wanna have
fifth house,
fun.
right? We want to have fun. I hope that that's TBH. That's like 98% of the reason. It's 2% the professional stuff. I'm here to have a good time for a long time.
So is your Saturn in Sag?
Possibly.
Conjunct Uranus?
Maybe. So the house of good fortune, Venus joys here. Those are other benefic. We want some fifth house fun and banqueting. NORWAC in real life, there's a banquet room. People go in there. People
There's
do
a
eat the
dance
food.
party.
There is a dance party.
And there's lots of alcohol.
There's also the lobby, which is really where the party is, to be honest. Play, games, recreation. Here's where I'm thinking about like, can't really do like astro drama if you're by yourself. We need a group of people to get down with those types of things, and like friends and pleasure, literally that's where they belong. We're one of the many places we can see friends and pleasure. All the good stuff goes to the fifth house.
I'm thinking about NORWAC 2019 when there was like a late night Never Have I Ever Astro edition.
Yes.
That, yeah.
I was waiting for it to turn into Spin the Bottle just because of like the circle up and the weird spot.
NORWAC 2022.
Okay,
I think that's in the cards.
Heard after hours party. And then like the ninth house, right? Because we are talking about astrology. So Temple of the Sun, House of the God. The ninth house is like, I feel like Nate Craddock is just like an embodiment of the ninth house. I'm pretty sure I saw him in here. Astrology, divination, the oracular arts live there. Counselors, teachers, and priests. We hold various combinations of roles like that. Dreams, visions, wisdom, tradition. I feel like when we engage our communities, we're getting really dreamy with it.
Especially astrology, like, yeah, obviously, like it's what we do as the ninth house, but yeah, as diviners, as like, we're always in our heads, we're always thinking big, and I think it's important to, yeah, I'm glad you added the ninth house in here.
Yeah, I saw a comment from Chris Lamb. He says, be very Saturnian, constantly wonder how to continue to preserve a nourishing way to see community in a world where the term is being commodified by corporations and giant influencers. And I just feel like that really kind of fits with that dreaming. Like we are sitting here as astrologers dreaming into these future possibilities. So I want to show a couple chart examples of like how one could roll through and see community in your own personal chart. We'll show you a couple charts of existing astrological orgs whose data is on Astro Databank. If it wasn't on Astro Databank, that's part of why an org may not have made it here. Also brevity. And then just open it up to juicy conversation. I see some great comments going on in there. Aaron had made a comment about the third house holding care, which I want to circle back to. But let's just kind of keep jamming through these slides. So the third and 11th house rulers, right? So how can we see this playing out in the chart? This is my chart. I purposely did not put any time to data, so I will read you the placements. I have Mercury ruling my third house, 4 degrees of Leo, and I have Venus ruling my 11th house, 12 degrees of Leo. Those two planets are placed in my second house. So already, for those of you who are familiar with my work, I do talk about and write about my engagement with astrological communities, primarily through meeting folks in person in these local spaces. And that is been the basis of like my professional, at least all of my work opportunities in the astrological world have come through that sort of thing. So if we pop to the next slide, the question to all of you to hold in your heads or to answer in the chat right now if you'd like to. How do you connect to local groups, and how do you see that in your own third house ruler? You can hold that question. Like I said, we can talk about it in the Galaxy room afterwards. Throw it in the chat if you have your chart memorized or have it with you. Where's your third house ruler? Do you already see something about its placement that's like, oh, that's why I do that? Avery says, I am my dead ass empty third house and 11th house, other than Chiron. Well, that explains a lot. But where are the rulers of those
The
houses?
rulers are what we want to look
Yeah,
at.
right. Because I also have an empty third house.
Same.
And an empty 11th house that's actually intercepted if we get quadrant. Well, the sign Taurus is intercepted in the 11th house if we get quadrant with it. But those rulers are there together. So we clearly see that whether we're talking affiliation or local, I'm about it. I'm very about it.
For sure.
And then if we go to this next one, this Kirah's chart.
Oh, I didn't even, when I was flipping through the slides, I didn't even notice that, like, I was like, oh, cool, some cute charts. So, yeah, the ruler of my third is Venus in Libra, in the 8th house. And I see this as like, yeah, of course I want to surround myself with beautiful counselors. Yeah. And then the fact that there's a sign-based trine to my Saturn in Aquarius, which rules my 11th house, I think really nicely connects the third and the 11th, especially in these kind of dark houses. And again, astrology is a very, I wouldn't say it's a dark art necessarily, but it's something that isn't, I guess, super, it's not traditional. It's not very, I shouldn't say it's not a traditional career is what I meant to say. I stopped there. And it's something that's sort of like I don't know, I struggle with saying it's hidden, but it's not, it's a more like covert, that's not the right word, is it?
Occulted?
Yeah, occulted. Thank you. But yeah, of course I have Saturn in Aquarius, ruling my 11th house. And that's just, yeah, my Saturn placement is very much like concerned with community and community spaces. And my Saturn return has been all about that. I would say since Saturn entered Capricorn, that's just been a huge topic for me. It's just like, how do I create, spaces within this community, like being like feeling like that's my responsibility, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah. I mean, I personally really see this showing up.
Sorry.
With that 12th house placement for you, that like, it's not called the Kirah community, right? Like, it's not you putting yourself out there front and center, and knowing you as a friend as well as a colleague, knowing how that 8th house is showing up there. I think a lot of people have heard, Kirah offers a lot of scholarships and sliding scale opportunities, and is so about accessibility, not just financial accessibility, but accessibility for folks with lots of different accessibility needs. And so I think we can see that playing out there in the 3rd and the 11th. There's so many more comments that I could possibly keep up with of people breaking down the interrelationships. And I see Zach coming in for 15.
No, not yet. But your slides right now are very blurry. I just wanted to check in about that. I don't know, something you hit, then
okay, let me just reshare real quick. Sorry. I think I did this weird thing by accident where I whatever, I don't have to explain it. How's it now? Still blurry?
Still blurry.
Oh, let's see.
Can you go to the next slide? I want to
How's
see
that?
changes. No, it looks pixelated and blurry. Yeah.
Interesting. Okay.
Okay, so here, don't move it. I'm paying attention to people in the chat because I'm not the only one that sees it blurry, but some say they see it fine on their end.
Okay.
Interesting.
So, okay. I'm just worried about the recording. That's my responsibility, right?
It looks fine on our end.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
and I have several are saying it's blurry on there. So and mind you, even if we go over a little bit, I have control of this whole room, so we don't have to do it right on time, just so you know, because it's the last lecture of the session. So we got a little bit of time here. So
okay.
Go back out again. We'll just remember where we're at, if you don't mind, like starting over one more time, see what happens.
Yeah, sure.
By the way, you two are doing fantastic.
Oh,
this is
thank you,
really awesome.
Nick.
This is awesome. Thank you. Yeah.
Is that good?
Okay, I'll leave it
It
there
is
because I'm going to do. Is it good on your end? that?
It's not, no.
Oh,
Is it
okay.
fine on
I
yours?
had to change my size of my window, and
I'm gonna do something real quick.
yeah, and
which is
anybody
X
else
out of this.
who's has a blurred window, just shift your window a little bit and it'll correct itself.
Okay.
Interesting. This
Yeah.
is some
Thanks
We
for those who
love
said
Mercury retrograde station.
Yeah,
Yes.
luckily we have our
All of that.
We
Mercurials
love you,
with us
Mercury.
helping out. So thank you, Zach and Nick.
It's
Of
good to hear
course.
that. Like you're lucky. Some other people.
Oh
say
yeah,
something.
it looks great now. Okay, perfect.
Okay,
great.
I'll
There we
mute
go.
myself. Good
We
job.
lost the chat, but that's fine. Okay.
Oh, I can pull the chat back up. I gotcha.
Are we sure?
Yeah.
Okay. Boom.
There
So
we
we're
go.
chatting. What do you share with your astrology friends? Okay, so Kirah shares a lot of information about accessibility and also like access, literally the financial means to access Kirah's work. I think we can carry on from this point now. So the 5th and the 9th house rulers, right? So we're going to assess the 5th and 9th house rulers. We can skip to the next one because this is still the same thing. Oh no, I messed up things. So let's go back one. So this is back to my chart. 5th house, 9th house rulers, boom, pop them in. We got Mars at 21 degrees of Leo, also in the 2nd house. And we have Jupiter at 29 degrees of Aries in the 10th. Surprise, surprise, I really just am about astrological communities. That's what I do. I do a lot of it, a lot of eggs in that one basket. And pretty much all of my astrological career is oriented around creating and engaging communities and being somebody who's actively engaged in astrological community.
Ruler of my 5th is the moon and Aries in the 2nd. And then the ruler of my, what was I looking at? The ruler of my 9th is in the 9th. Okay. So this to me, like the first thing that pops in my mind when I look at my own chart in this context is about like kind of like influx and just like creating tangible physical goods, which I think ruler of the 5th and the 2nd, ruled by this 9th house Mars, which is the reason I can't stop doing too much. But yeah, like my Mars situation in the 9th is very much connected to like my astrology. It's like, oh, how do I make money? Astrology. Where do I spend all my money? Astrology. Yeah, but the astrology piece I think is just super loud here. And also I think actually never mind. I'm not gonna go into
Oh, I think this is instructive too, in that what was I going to say about that? Yes, influx, definitely the publishing piece, right?
Yeah,
the publishing piece. So in terms of like, what do you seek to create, right? That's why I put yours there with the what do you seek to create? Because we can see if we start to really dig down in there, 9th and the 3rd houses, right, end up going to these domicile planets that we get a 2nd house element. So there is a tangible physical creation, even when that tangible physical creation is a specifically defined digital space.
Another thing is I'm really big on astrologers getting their bag. I just realized that. So that's like a really huge thing that I care about within astrology, the field / community, is that we're getting paid in the ways that we should be getting paid. I think diviners are special people and we should be comfortable. And I think it's really hard for a lot of us to talk about money and pricing. And I took it upon myself to be very loud about it because the ruler of my 2nd house is a loud ass out of sect Mars.
Right, and then the next one, right? So where does the astrology fit in? We can, right, I already said that. Mine's so very obvious. And if we go to the next one, I think this gets a little bit more clear where we start to add in, if we start to think about what are the relationships? So this is a question to y'all to think about your own charts, to pop into the chat if you choose to. What are the relationships that exist between the rulers of the 3rd, 5th, 9th, and 11th houses? What happens if you layer in their dispositors or the rulers of the angles? This is just a way where, if for those of you who are more on the beginner end or who are learning to read charts or just starting, you might start with the ascendant rule, SMR, go in there. What's the sun? What's the moon? What's the rising sign and its ruler? But if we want to ask this question of like, who am I in astrological community? We might start with, well, what's the ruler of the 3rd? What's the ruler of the 11th? How did the 5th and 9th get thrown in the mix? Let's see, little head nod. So I'm assuming everyone's with us. So one thing I found interesting, just putting our two charts in there, is that with Kirah's, all roads lead to these like very domiciled planets. I have to throw in the sun, which, you know, gets caught up in the mix there. But
a
you'll
very
notice
domiciled planet.
a very domiciled planet.
Just has a lot of company.
But you'll notice that, like, you know, my chart ruler is missing from the mix here. But one thing that I did want to illustrate, which kind of just further belabors the point, the ruler of my midheaven, Jupiter, is there in that 10th house. And so you could see me as someone who's just really up in astrological organizations, but the fact that Jupiter is ruling that midheaven really brings it into, like, that is my work. And so the majority, everything that I have done astrologically has actually started with an astrological organization, then become personal, and then a project has emerged out of that.
That makes sense.
Okay, so hello, is there anybody out there, these distorted NASA images, I'm gonna not be upset about it, astrological organizations and local orgs, that's what we're talking about. So here are a few that I have charts for because they're timed. These are placed in this order because we're tracking them roughly with Pluto through the signs, not the Pluto signs of the people in the orgs, but where was Pluto when this org was founded. So American Federation of Astrologers is one of the oldest ones that I found time data for. OPA is one of the youngest ones, and then there are some emerging orgs kind of on the cusp, like Micah. And I don't know if Mercury's Brood is going to be a long-term org or its own project, but we could think about Mercury's Brood as being one of the Pluto and Capricorn contenders. So we'll show you a couple charts here, and we can think about. So we got the data as well for anybody who wants to pull that up. So American Federation of Astrologers, they were founded May 4th, 1938 at 11:38 a.m. in Washington, D.C. That says Washington Monument, District of Columbia, USA. So AFA has a Pluto in Cancer, right? And they're actually coming up on their Pluto opposition right now. And so I wanted to pull them in there, one where we can look at the third, we can look at the fifth, we can see a few different things that are going on there. One of the main things I noticed is this little mutual reception that's going on between Mercury, 25 degrees of Aries, that is stationing in the 9th house, and Mars and Gemini in the 11th. And I'm thinking about how many books were published by AFA. I feel like you can't go to a good metaphysical used bookstore without finding something that was printed by AFA. And I know that was a really big part of a lot of astrologers' careers, engagement with organizations, and a bit of the impetus for AFAN much later down the road being started.
Sense. Yeah, and the ruler of the 2nd house is also that stationing Mercury in the 9th. So we get, again, the ruler of the 9th being how you're making your money, how you're making your living. In this case, the organization's funds come from publishing. That makes a lot of sense.
So I see a really interesting comment here from Taylor, between Taylor and Avery, about the ethics panel today and the question that came up around generational representation. So how do I get to know astrologers in different generations other than donating time by volunteering, especially if my temporal availability is restricted by my financial circumstances? That's one that I think we can definitely talk about, Aya and AFAN. We definitely want to loop that in. And I think as we kind of go through some more of these charts, just for the sake of time, anybody's welcome. The slides will be available. You can peruse these at length.
Sorry, did you want me to flip to the next one?
Yeah, go ahead and flip to the next one, because any of the other comments here that I'll pepper in are kind of along the lines of just consider what's your synastry with these orgs. AFA was my first org, their ascendant's on my sun. Not surprising that I was like, oh, hey, let me check this out.
Yeah, okay.
But in terms of the generational aspect, you know, one of the things that I've been thinking about as I'm looking at these charts, and I want to really invite folks to consider, is, do we see that third 11th emphasis, 5th 9th emphasis, or both other things? How's that 6th house play out, and how does that play out in the felt experience of engaging astrological orgs that are more specifically about production and work? So I'm thinking about like the orgs like NCGR, So this is the Astrological Association, also known as the Astrological Association of Great Britain. They were founded June 21st, I should say 21st of June, 1958 in London, England. And so we'll see that they have a 0-degree Virgo Pluto. There were some Leo and Libra orgs, but they were in languages I couldn't pronounce, and I couldn't read the information about them, so I did not include them in this presentation. But we can, so again, looking,
sorry, you're at the 15-minute mark.
Beautiful. Okay, so there's just including these so that folks can have them mostly for the recording.
I just have to note, you can't not see that beautiful Jupiter on the midheaven in the 11th, and the house of its joy. Yeah, it's just really nice, and I had to note. And then also, like, you got this nice domiciled Venus. This is a great chart.
Yes, definitely. So NCGR, the National Council of Geocosmic Research, founded March 6, 1971, 9:02 p.m. in Wareham, Massachusetts. And now we are getting in. I knew I was going to not be able to see Pluto at some point. There we go. The very tail end of Pluto in Virgo. And here, one of the things I noticed was that Sun, Mercury in the 6th, with Cazimi. Mercury, that Cazimi with Mercury ruling the 9th, and just made me think about, oh, right, like there's so much about research and publishing research. And I noticed that trend, that same feature with Isar, with an Isar's member letter. Could not find a founding date for the organization as a separate thing. But as we flip through, there'll be another.
I'm sorry. The research aspect of this is just so spot on with like the all the planets in the 3rd and Sag, and then we get that 6th house, Cazimi, sextile Saturn in the 8th. It feels so like behind the scenes type of work. I just love that.
Yeah, and there's another domiciled Jupiter and Sag for the 3rd house.
Beautiful.
Yep. Association for Young Astrologers. So this is one I really want to talk about because this organization was founded expressly with the intent of, so Association for Young Astrologers is for astrologers who are young of heart,
young in astrology,
so new practitioners of any age. I like to think of the other way of describing young as young in Saturn lapse. So whether you are young in Saturn lapse, whether you have an affection for those who are young in their lapse of Saturn, but you have had a few, Aya is for everyone, and part of their mission is expressly about facilitating that intergenerational exchange. And we should have Afan and Opa coming up next. So Opa, not too much further behind them. Did I lose a slide? I lost a slide. I apologize, everyone. How did I miss Afan? Yeah, at least I have it here. So Afan, I apologize. I'll have to just verbal this chart data. 29th of January, 1988, 2:12 p.m. in San Francisco, California. Of course, I would for somehow Mercury out the org that I've been most involved with and am currently actively involved with as well. AFAN is another such organization that is expressly about facilitating networking. So literally helping folks get to know each other. If you have the wonderful opportunity to attend NORWAC in person, AFAN is an org that offers scholarships to that end to help facilitate that for folks who are short on financial accessibility resources.
They also do co-working sessions. Like it's a really cool org to be a part of.
Mentoring, which is entirely free to participate in. And if you have skills that you would like to share with others, then you are also welcome to apply to be a mentor, not just receive mentoring. Those are spaces where you would be volunteering time for sure. And so that question can get a little bit trickier, but I think particularly with Aya and AFAN, there is that that express intention in the founding of the organizations. And with AFAN, having had that conversation with Georgia about where they emerged from, part of AFAN, the impetus for AFAN was to see a younger generation of astrologers be invited into the structure and the fabric of the astrological world in a way that facilitated a better livelihood, getting their bag based on speaking appearances, publishing of books. And so, I know AFAN is an organization that's looking at what can be done innovatively to bridge that gap. And as Sam pointed out last night in the Race and Astrology panel, you know, the big organizations are going to be the slowest to change, just because any nonprofit has articles and boards, and it's not the same as like Laura, who can just say, I'm doing this next year, or a for-profit like an astrology school that can just make that decision. Portland School of Astrology is a bit of a kind of hybrid in there, where they've got a bit more ability to be agile and adaptive. OPA is another professional oriented organization where they are looking at providing resources for folks who are working astrologers. And again, just want to kind of point out that you see that ruler of the third to the sixth, and more of that emphasis on
the doing,
the doing and the working. So conversation, Q&A. I have a couple questions on these next slides. So what do you see in your third and 11th houses that relates to the way that you've been, are, or want to be involved in astrological community? I've seen a couple of comments coming in there. Yes, a lot of people have lost slides this weekend. It's a very fun weekend to proofread your slides. So we can just keep like flipping through these questions, and folks can just keep chiming in the chat. Zach, invitation to you. If there are any questions that you have noted or flagged, or something that looks really juicy, a comment that looks juicy, please feel free to just chime in and drop it in there. And I'll read these for folks who are listening to the recording. Again,
can I chime in here really quick?
Yes, please.
I just want to let people know, because there's several questions earlier, because we're talking about lost slides. And the speakers, just so y'all know, they submit the PDF and it'll show up in the recording. And I'm saying this too because I saw the email that you sent me with the newest update, correct? Yeah, and so those slides will be up for everyone. If you're wondering about the times of the certain orgs and it went by too fast, they should be up on the slides. So, yeah.
Cool. Thanks, Nick. Cool.
So one question that I merged over the weekend, this is one I think is a trend, just in getting to listen to Kelly Surtees speak, listen to Jason Hawley speak over the weekend. It's like, where do you see the meaning making power of Jupiter at play in these astrological organizations? So like, for instance, for me, with that Jupiter in the 10th ruling my midheaven, I really do see astrological organizations almost as like some newfangled version of the old-timey guild. That's the place where you go, to get the fellowship, also to have a physical space where we congregate. I feel like that's so important, like the annual pilgrimage to NORWAC. And I got the sense seeing seeing some of the astrologers who had shown up since the very first one, or on their number 20,
met their partners at NORWAC. Like it's such a I'm picturing the lobby right now, and just like walking up into that space and that feeling of familiarity and comfort. Can't wait. 1 year, you guys.
Yes. And again, thinking about the meaning making power of Jupiter, and then what about the connecting quality of Venus, right? We've been talking about these benefics and leaning a little bit more in. I've been thinking about what Kelly had to say about temperament. How do we bring the water, especially as such an airy field? Jason was talking about, we're very diurnal practice,
right?
Or it can be very easy to do astrology in a way that is thoroughly diurnal. So how do we bring in twilight? How do we bring in the night sect into our practices?
The moisture.
How do y'all see that playing out? I know Aaron had a lovely comment about the third house relating. It's way deep back there. Aaron had a lovely comment about the third house relating to care practices. I'm curious if anybody else wants to re-comment. I almost said retweet a previous comment down here in the chat, so it's a little easier to find. What are your thoughts about where Venus, either in your own chart, in relationship to in one of those astrological organizations, how's Venus show up for you? So Aaron said third house is where care happens. I think people in communities care about each other and are accountable to the space between their intentions and how they impact each other and the group as a whole. Yes.
Something, just a note about the Venus thing that came up for me, aside from wine connecting us, after hours at NORWAC. I'm just thinking of things like aesthetics and beauty and like imagery and how I don't know, those are also things that connect us when we find these like things outside of astrology that bring us together, like a love of the same music or the same food and things like that. And I'm also thinking about how important Venus is in community, again, for those one-on-one connections, and forming those one-on-one relationships.
Just wanted to let you all know, I guess right at the point of talking about Venus, it makes so much sense that I would pop in, but you have 5 minutes left.
Beautiful.
Cool. Thank you, Zach.
Yes.
Thank you, Venus incarnate, Zach.
Yes. I see Callie says, I sometimes feel out of place in community and or get a strong need to distance myself. Venus in Virgo rules my 11th. Saturn in Aquarius sits in and rules another place where the chat is moving too fast for Bear to read out loud. Rules my 3rd. Hope some of that out of placeness will sort out a bit post Saturn return.
Yeah, I'm sure Saturn return will have a lot to do with how you show up in local spaces. And how you connect with people on that level. But with Saturn, distance is important, like a lot of connecting happens again online through distance. And I think that's important to note. Like you don't need to have like a local meetup. Maybe not someone that needs, a monthly local dinner to connect with folks. Maybe you come twice a year, or maybe an online community would be good for you. Just thinking things like that. Whereas I think someone who maybe has like a moon and Cancer in the 3rd house is like, no, I need to see you once a month for dinner. Like I need to eat with you, So yeah, differences in that way.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's going to show up in so many different ways. We can keep just flying through these so we can get all the questions in there. Which astrological organizations are you or have you been a member of? I don't think I rattled off my extensive list.
Oh yeah.
At one point or another, I have been a member of, I think, everything I listed there. I've been a member of AFA, AFAN, AYA, OPA, NCGR, ESAR, WASA. I think I got pretty much all the major orgs in the US at the very least. Yeah, I love astrological organizations. I can't stop, won't stop. I read the bylaws for most of them, and yeah,
you take it very seriously.
I do take it very seriously. I think that the role of those organizations is to steward the craft, and as we enter an age where there aren't guilds, we can't really as easily be part-time religious specialists wandering through the Egyptian desert like Dorotheus, just like, hey, mentor me. I think it's especially incumbent upon those of us who have the skills, interests, and abilities to do that work. If it wasn't for Nick shoulder tapping me when I went to my first NORWAC and was about to mosey off, having not talked to anybody, I would not be sitting here today.
I mean, if it wasn't for Nick, me showing him a copy of Influx and him making me meet Tony Howard, I don't know if I would be the director of Fresh Voices right now. So shout out to Nick.
Making careers over there.
Yeah, being the mercurial connector that we need.
Yeah, so I'm curious, yes, no, yay, nay, list them all in there if you want to in the last few minutes in the chat. Are you active with any local groups, national orgs, or both? But I suppose the more important question, while you all type in whatever organizations you're in, is what's important to you in astrological community? And I guess let's really focus on these last ones and get the slides in. Is community even the right word? Or are we a field, an industry, something else? And what does the future of astrology need from those of us who are in this room right now? Leave it to me on a Mercury retrograde to leave the last 1 minute to get through all the most important questions. So I think some of that's been kind of made clear. I think that maybe community isn't always the right word. I think a community, WASA is a community organization for sure. I think all the people who attend WASA meetings share community. I think all
School of Astrology is another
is a community for sure. And I feel that community as one of the program teachers there with the other program teachers, even the ones I haven't met, because I know that there's that shared space. Same goes for NORWAC, particularly as I become a veteran, I don't know, a neophyte, an adept of NORWAC. There is that sense of I'm in community with the elders who, you know, the folks, and when I say elder, I mean this with the most native esteem and respect. You know, the elders of the community who went to their first NORWAC when I was not a gleam in anyone's eye yet. You know, I feel a sense of being in community, even though I maybe never actually talked to some of those folks.
I feel like the NORWAC crew is a community in and of itself too. And then we have these communities within the field of astrology. But as our amazing friend and colleague Diana Rose Harper, as we were talking about last night, like I think field is the right word. I think field is a more appropriate word. When we're talking about astrology as a whole, I'm really against astrology as an industry. I don't think industry is the right word, but fields seem spot on to me.
Yeah, I think our astrological work can certainly fit within the health and wellness industry or some other industries, and
tech.
And that from that context, it makes sense that we would be having these much more rigorous, airy conversations about ethics. What does it mean to engage ethically as a practitioner who is viewed as somebody who is part of the health and wellness industry? Which brings us to this question that I leave all of you with and invite you all to, we can actually dialogue when you all can be unmuted in the Galaxy room. What does the future of astrology need from those of us in this room, those of us who are listening to this recording or catching the video replay? Yeah, what does the future of astrology, the various astrologies that we love, need from us for the future?
So
I want to thank Kirah, my very special guest.
Thank you.
Wait, go back to your slide.
Okay, yeah. Sorry.
For joining us. You can catch Kirah.
Oh, yeah. Find me at the Strology on the socials, and thestrology.com is my website. And then my show, the Astrology show, Bear's on like 18 episodes. No, Bear's on like 4 episodes or something. And a lot of speakers that you've heard this weekend have been on this show. I hope to get more. Listen to my show. It's a goodie.
And I'm Bear River. You can find me mostly on Twitter at astralids. You can also find me, especially more of my recent work, on patreon.com/bearriver. I'm changing my website. So right now, Psyche and Soul Astrology, if you're listening to this in the future, it will be bearriver.com. Thank you all very much for your time and attention in this space today, and for joining us, for sharing your energy. And I look forward to chatting with you in the breakout room.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much. This was so good. I loved this. Really, really, really incredible discussion. So thank you both for being here. And thank you.
Oh, sorry. That was
okay.
me.
No, it's okay. No, this is good. That 1 foot old school, you know, I'm a Gen Xer, so I'm in between, you know, and in many ways. One thing I will say about local regional orgs, because that's how I connected here in Seattle in a way. First of all, I met Laura as a teacher, and then, you know, by the way, I started off as a room monitor at NORWAC. I didn't even know that was happening. I didn't even know there was the local association, and I was studying astrology in Seattle before that for years. I still didn't know there were 2 major deals in my hometown. So I can't remember how I hooked up with Laura, but here I was at this house, and she was teaching me with her mom's house on the couch and many students. And it came to this, you know, we do this conference thing. I'm like, what are you guys talking about? It's like, this is what it is. I'm like, I'm broke, you know, I don't have any money. It's like, well, you can volunteer, you could be a room monitor. That's how my journey started there. Okay. So, and in the sense, getting to the place I am now and meeting people along the way. At the same time, with the local Washington State Astrological Association, to go to a space that's at a yacht club. If some of you know this weird place of old white people on the in pictures on the wall with flags, they're both like, but anyway, it's cheap rent. So they have it there. And, you know, and Bear knows, Bear was living in the area. And, you know, and the reason why I'm saying this about regional groups, orgs, whatever you want to call them, some of them have faded away. And some of them have been on hiatus because of not being able to meet in a physical space because of the pandemic, right? So WASA moved online, right? And we've had members join outside the city, which is great, but we want to be in a physical space. So whatever the case is, and it's something for people to think about, because here we are coming out of this pandemic space. We know social media. Many of you listening to this, and I'm looking at the chat, you have that down. You have the social down. Okay. So, but I know some people cannot meet in the physical space, right? And so we think about other containers, and some people can, or some people never have, or they don't, or maybe through COVID realize they want to see each other in physical space. The reason why I'm saying this is I know we talk and we get psyched to be an in-person NORWAC, right? You've had some stories and so on and so forth, but I don't want to leave out the people who can't make it next year or any other year, right? And that we can connect online in other spaces and groups. At the same time, this is like a little call to think is like, and if you can meet in the space, but you can't get on a plane and you can't travel, that the local thing that you all talked about is huge. And I think I for me, if I look at it astrologically and I look at a Uranus and Taurus transit, for me, this whole pandemic reminded me of my senses. It reminded me of what happens when my senses are engaged with other human beings, whether we share a meal together, we hear the same music together. It's a combination of that, if that is even possible. And if a bunch of those senses are put together, we're in a physical space, the types of conversations and interactions that happen, So, but again, that's sometimes it's hard and difficult for others for that to happen. But I envision something new coming within our community that integrates, let's say, nature itself and human beings and how we interact in the space with our senses. So if it's virtually, some of our senses are engaged right now, and how do we feed those senses? How does it feel, right? And then when we're in a physical space, like, how's the food taste while we're talking about whatever, but it's like the very, very simple things. You all said it. You mentioned some stories where I tapped you on the shoulder or something. Someone did that to me in the beginning.
And we'll be doing that to folks as well.
Oh yes.
Yeah. So I'm and thank you for letting me talk and say something like this. It's very inspiring, and again, anybody out there feels like, oh, I maybe I could start something locally, or I know this other person here, or whatever, like, go for it, do it. It might not be perfect, but all these orgs that we talked about today, all these whatevers, they all didn't know what the hell they were doing in the beginning either. They were all they were doing the full card, they're jumping off the cliff with a smile on their face. So, it's one of those things. So don't let anything stop you, is what I'm saying.
I started Deep Seekers just by like posting on Facebook. I want to, like, if anyone is interested in getting together and talking about astrology, send me your email. I made an email list, and just that's how my intro into in-person astro community started. So it's really it's easier than you think.
Nice. Yeah, I just see Lawrence dropped a link for book club. And to your point, Nick, I think especially for folks who may not be able to make it to next year's NORWAC, I'm thinking about all the little NORWAC COVID pod parties that are happening now. Like, keep it up. That's your local area's next local group.
Yeah,
exactly.
Such a lovely Jupiter and domicile message of just do it.
Just do it. We should probably just close this room so we can go to the
let's
galaxy room and take a pee break in between those two things.
But let's head over there. And
thanks, folks.
Good job, everyone. Good job.
Thank you all so much.
All right, see you over in the other room.
See ya.
Okay.